At 60, the tragedy of Chris Rock is beyond heartbreaking. Chris Rock, the legendary voice of American comedy, the fearless man who spoke truth through laughter, a sharp mind that made the world not only laugh, but think. From the humble beginnings of a poor boy battling hardship and pain in Brooklyn, he carved his name into history as a global icon, admired, honored, celebrated, a living proof of how far the human spirit can rise from nothing. With 4 Emmy Awards, 3 Grammys, and countless honors that shaped the face of modern comedy, Chris Rock redefined the meaning of truth itself, turning laughter into a weapon of intellect and courage. For over 3 decades, he ruled America's greatest stages, where every punchline felt like both confession and salvation for an entire generation. But behind that brilliant legacy lies a story, not of glamour, but of battle, a war with inner demons that tore apart a marriage, media storms that once shook the spotlight, and a loneliness so deep that even the loudest laughter could not hide it. Before we begin, if you believe Chris Rock is one of the rarest and most honest voices of our time, leave a gentle like. This is a tribute to the man who made the world laugh while quietly carrying pain no one could see. It's heartbreaking when the voice that would one day make the world roar with laughter was first taught only silence. Before the applause, before the fame, there was only the sound of closing doors, and every silence carved him a little smaller. Every day felt like the echo of a dream too fragile to survive, because before the laughter, there was the pain, and it never really left. But that pain would one day become his greatest power, and that story begins right here. Before Chris Rock became the voice of American truth wrapped in laughter, he was a reflection of a country divided, a mirror to both its wounds and its wit. Born in 1965, when America itself was trembling between chaos and change, his childhood unfolded under the heavy sky of a nation still learning what equality meant. Television glowed in every living room, but it rarely showed faces that looked like his. Brooklyn in the 1970s was a paradox, brutal and beautiful, full of rhythm and danger, where laughter often lived right beside survival. It was the kind of place that taught you to speak loud or disappear, and for a boy named Chris, silence was the first language he had to unlearn. His parents, Julius and Rosalie Rock, were people of sweat and faith. Julius was a truck driver who worked 2 jobs and still found time to deliver newspapers before dawn. Rosalie was a school teacher and social worker who spent her nights helping broken families rebuild their hope. They didn't have much, but they carried something stronger than money, the belief that dignity was earned, not given. In their tiny Bedford-Stuyvesant apartment, the smell of coffee mixed with engine oil, chalk dust, and exhaustion. Every coin on the kitchen table had a purpose. Every laugh that escaped those walls was a rebellion, proof that joy could exist even in the narrowest of spaces. That was where Chris first learned that humor wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. When he was 10, the city reassigned him to a new school across town under a desegregation program that promised equality. But what awaited him wasn't inclusion, it was isolation. Each morning, the yellow school bus carried him miles away from his neighborhood and into a world that didn't want him there. He was one of the only black children in a sea of white faces where laughter came with cruelty and every joke had a sting. He never told his parents. He came home every afternoon with bruises on his arms and jokes on his lips, using comedy to hide pain the way others use silence to survive. That habit, born from fear, would one day build an empire. But at the time, it was only a shield, a trembling child pretending to be unbreakable. Outside the city was loud trains, screaming sirens, wailing men chasing one more paycheck. Inside, Chris began to study rhythm, not in music, but in people. The way they spoke, the pauses between their words, the moment before laughter broke the air. He started collecting pain, the way others collected coins, saving it, polishing it, turning it into something that sparkled when the light hit just right. Years later, he would call those days the foundation of everything. The hardship, the loneliness, the violence, it all became raw material. Pain for Chris Rock was never the end of the story. It was the beginning of the punchline. And yet, for every laugh he would one day give, the world there would always remain a silence behind it, a space untouched, unexplained waiting. Because even when fame came, that silence would follow. It was his ghost, his muse, his curse. He didn't know it yet, but every stage he would stand on was already being built inside that boy, one bruise, one insult, one lonely walk at a time. And when he finally spoke, the world would listen, not because he was funny, but because he was true. He had learned how to survive, but soon he would have to learn how to live. And that journey from silence to sound would begin in the dark corners of Brooklyn, where pain and humor first collided. Chris Rock was not born into comfort. He was born into noise, the rattle of trains, the hum of tired engines, the quiet sighs of working people who carried the weight of survival in their hands. Brooklyn didn't give him dreams, it gave him instincts. He learned early that life wouldn't hand him anything, not kindness, not fairness, not space to breathe. His father Julius was his first example of endurance. He would leave the house before sunrise, his hands already darkened by oil and newsprint. He worked until the city went quiet again, bringing home just enough for food rent and the smallest slice of hope. Chris would watch him count coins on the kitchen table, the metal clinking softly against the wood, the sound of pride disguised as poverty. He never complained, and that silence became its own lesson. Real strength doesn't shout, it endures. His mother Rosalie was a different kind of strength, tender but unyielding. By day, she guided preschoolers through their first steps in learning. By night, she visited broken families, offering empathy the world had denied them. To Chris, she was both anchor and compass, the one who believed laughter could heal even when life refused to be funny. When the family gathered around her at night, she would tell stories half truth, half parable, and somewhere between her words, Chris discovered rhythm, the rhythm of storytelling, the rhythm of emotion, the rhythm that would one day become his voice. But childhood in Brooklyn came with sharp edges. At 10 years old, Chris was placed in a predominantly white school far from his neighborhood. It was supposed to be progress. Instead, it became a battlefield. He was taunted, shoved, and mocked for things he couldn't change: his skin, his accent, his existence. Each morning he tied his shoelaces tighter, as if the knots could keep him together. Each afternoon he came home with bruises, both seen and unseen. He told no one. Silence was safer. Humor became armor. He began to tell jokes, small ones, at first harmless distractions. He'd mimic teachers, invent stories, twist reality into something funny enough to make people forget the cruelty of the day. And for a moment they laughed. For a moment he wasn't invisible. That was the beginning, not of comedy, but of survival through sound. There were nights he'd sit by the window, watching the city breathe through smoke and neon. He'd listen to the faint hum of cars, the echo of laughter from strangers below, and imagine himself on a stage where no one could touch him, no one could hurt him. He didn't know what that stage looked like yet, only that it existed somewhere beyond the noise. And in that dream, he found his first sense of peace. Years later, when people asked how he learned to be fearless, he said softly, "You can't scare a kid who's already lived through fear." That was the truth of his early years. Pain didn't break him, it sharpened him. Silence didn't erase him, it prepared him to speak. He was a child molded by contradiction, the noise of the city, the quiet of his home, the laughter of pain, and the pain of laughter. From those fragments, he built a voice the world could never forget. He had found a way to survive. But survival alone was never enough, because one day he would have to face a harder truth, that turning pain into jokes could save a crowd, but not always the man telling them. Adulthood did not greet Chris Rock with applause. It met him with cold nights, empty pockets, and a city that barely noticed he existed. He was 18, too young to have a plan, too old to keep dreaming. The skyline of New York glittered for everyone else. For him, it was a mirage, beautiful from a distance, cruel up close. He lived in a small rented room where the walls whispered when he breathed. The radiator coughed through winter, the kind of sound that reminded him he was still alive. Some nights he slept in his jacket, counting the cracks on the ceiling like constellations only he could see. By day, he cleaned tables and pushed mops through diners that smelled of grease and burnt coffee. By night, he chased laughter through the smoke and chaos of downtown comedy clubs. Those clubs were brutal. The lights were dim, the crowds drunk, the microphones old enough to hiss when they spoke. He would step up, nervous hands gripping the mic, trying to make strangers laugh before they finished their drinks. Some nights he succeeded, most nights he didn't. The silence after a failed joke was louder than any slap, sharper than any insult. But he stayed. He always stayed, because every laugh, even the smallest one, was proof he still had something to offer. He performed anywhere that would let him in. Basements, back rooms, street corners. Sometimes his payment was a drink, sometimes a sandwich. But every show taught him timing. Every rejection taught him rhythm. He was learning not just how to be funny, but how to survive failure in front of an audience. He began writing every day, filling notebooks with ideas, memories, and pain disguised as punchlines. The same boy who once sat in silence was now building a language of his own, raw, unfiltered, honest. He didn't talk about fame, he talked about truth, and truth in his voice was terrifying and beautiful all at once. One night in 1986, inside a small Manhattan club called Catch a Rising Star, fate walked in wearing leather and confidence. Eddie Murphy, already a god in the world of comedy, watched the skinny kid stumble through his set. Others saw an amateur. Murphy saw fire. After the show, he walked up to Chris and said, "You've got something." That single sentence changed everything. A few months later, Chris was on the set of Beverly Hills Cop 2, his first movie appearance. It wasn't a big role, but it was enough. Enough to taste what it felt like to be seen. Enough to know that the years of humiliation hadn't been for nothing. He had walked through hunger, loneliness, and fear, and somehow he was still standing. But success in Hollywood is never what it seems. The lights were bright, but the rooms were cold. Every conversation felt like a transaction. Every smile came with calculation. He was inside the dream now, but it didn't feel like home. He would later say, "You don't make it in this business. You survive it." And that's what he did, survived. Every small victory, every quiet failure, every night that ended with more questions than answers. When Saturday Night Live called in 1990, it felt like destiny knocking. A new stage, a bigger stage. But behind that promise was something darker, pressure politics, and the brutal war of comedy itself. He didn't know it yet, but the laughter that would soon lift him higher than ever would also push him to the edge. When Saturday Night Live called Chris Rock, thought he had finally arrived. Studio 8H, the dream of every young comedian glowing under cold blue lights. But behind the cameras, it was war. The writer's room was a battlefield of caffeine, cigarette smoke, and panic. Every joke was a weapon, every silence a death sentence. He once said, "You either kill or you die," and most of us died before we learned how to kill. Still, he fought for every line, every second of airtime, every chance to prove he belonged. When the show ended in 1993, it felt like the laughter had stopped mid-breath. He wandered New York's wet streets, too famous to start over, too broke to stop. He returned to small clubs, the same smoky basements where he'd begun, starting again from the ground. The audiences were smaller now, but the truth came louder. He wasn't just telling jokes anymore, he was confessing. 3 years later, in 1996, came The Fire, Bring the Pain, a single stand-up special that redefined not only his career, but the entire language of comedy. He walked onto that stage wearing black leather and fury. The house lights dimmed, one breath, then an eruption. The crowd roared like thunder meeting confession. His voice was sharp, his rhythm surgical. He dissected race, politics, power, hypocrisy, turning laughter into revelation. The jokes cut deep, but they healed deeper. When the night was over, he walked off stage a legend. 2 Emmys followed, sold-out arenas, the face of a generation that wanted comedy with conscience. For the first time, America wasn't just laughing at Chris Rock, it was listening. But success came dressed like exhaustion. The more the world wanted from him, the less of him there was left to give. The tours grew longer, the applause louder, and the silence afterward unbearable. He once said, "When they call you the best, you stop sleeping, because what if they find out you're not?" He began to chase perfection the way some chase peace, endlessly, desperately. In 1997, The Chris Rock Show took his power to another level. He grilled politicians and celebrities with precision, turning interviews into mirrors that forced truth out of arrogance. Behind his laughter was fury, controlled, elegant, impossible to ignore. He was no longer just a comedian. He was a cultural force. Then came Bigger and Blacker in 1999, Never Scared in 2004, each one louder, sharper, faster. He was performing hundreds of shows a year. Laughter became oxygen, applause became habit, exhaustion became home. Some nights, after standing ovations, he sat alone in the dressing room, under the buzz of fluorescent lights, staring at his trembling hands. The crowds had gone home, but the noise in his head stayed. He had everything he once dreamed of: fame, wealth, power, yet felt further from peace than ever. The boy who once feared silence now longed for it, because success, he would learn, doesn't protect you from pain, it only amplifies it. He had climbed higher than anyone imagined possible, but at the top, he found something unexpected: loneliness. And in that loneliness, the first cracks began to appear. He had built an empire out of laughter. Now he would face the one thing laughter could not fix: the tragedies waiting behind the curtain. At the height of his fame, when the lights were brightest and the crowds endless, Chris Rock discovered that laughter could no longer save him. The roar of the audience faded quicker each night, leaving only echoes behind. He was surrounded by millions, yet deeply, painfully alone. Fame had made him powerful, but it had also made him fragile. Every headline, every rumor, every whispered judgment cut a little deeper. He was still standing, still smiling, still funny, but the smile had begun to tremble. Then came the losses that no stage could prepare him for. In 1988, his father Julius went in for what was supposed to be a simple surgery. Chris didn't worry. His father had survived harder things: poverty, exhaustion, racism, years of brutal labor. But that morning the call came. Julius Rock was gone. No warning, no goodbye, only silence. In that silence, something inside Chris broke quietly, permanently. He walked into the hospital room and stared at the still hands that had built his world, the hands that once smelled of metal and sweat, now cold, unmoving. He wanted to speak, but no words came. For years afterward, every joke he told carried the weight of that silence. He once said, "When my dad died, part of me died too, but the other part got louder." That louder part, the pain, learning how to breathe, became his art. But life wasn't done testing him. In 2006, his half-brother Charles died from alcoholism. Another rock, another loss. There were no headlines this time, no public mourning, just another piece of his past quietly erased. Addiction doesn't just take lives, it steals the chance for one more conversation, one more forgiveness, one more tomorrow. Chris turned his grief into truth, his pain into rhythm. He said, "I've seen what happens when men don't talk about their pain, so now I make mine talk for me." And that's what he did night after night. But some wounds don't come from loss, they come from love. For nearly 20 years, Chris Rock was married to Malak Compton, the woman who once gave him peace in a world full of noise. Their home in New Jersey was a sanctuary. Children's laughter in the hallway, soft jazz in the mornings, the kind of quiet he thought he'd never know. But fame is a jealous companion. It takes the best parts of a man and sells them to strangers. The tours grew longer, the absences heavier, and the silence between them colder. He once confessed, "Sometimes a marriage doesn't break from shouting, it breaks from silence." Infidelity followed, not passion, but escape. He admitted his mistakes publicly, painfully. I wasn't a good husband, he said. That's nobody's fault but mine. In 2016, after 19 years together, the divorce became final. No scandals, no revenge, just two people quietly drifting apart, leaving behind the fragments of something once beautiful. Afterward, he turned to therapy, not for fame, not for image, but to understand himself. He began confronting the fears he had hidden behind jokes, intimacy, vulnerability, the instinct to perform instead of connect. He learned that healing isn't loud. It's awkward, it's slow, it's quiet. And just as he began to rebuild the world, witnessed his composure tested in a way no one could forget. March 27th, 2022, the night of the Oscars. The Dolby Theater shimmered in gold, filled with laughter, applause, and cameras capturing everything. Chris Rock stood under the spotlight, confident, poised, doing what he'd done for decades, turning words into laughter. Then came one joke, one moment, one man rising from his seat. The sound of a slap cut through the room like thunder through glass. The world froze. Billions watched as Chris Rock stood silent, unmoving, his hand at his side, his face calm but pale. He didn't strike back. He didn't curse. He didn't fall. He simply stood there, the same boy from Brooklyn who had learned long ago that silence could be strength. In that instant, he became more than a comedian. He became a symbol of grace under fire. Later he would say, "You don't fight fire with fire. You wait until the smoke clears, then you rebuild." That night didn't break him. It revealed him. The pain, the discipline, the years of silence, all of it converged in one moment of restraint that the world would never forget. When he finally spoke about it a year later in selective outrage, he turned humiliation into art rage, into rhythm, and pain into poetry. He didn't mock. He didn't gloat. He simply told the truth the way he always had, and the world once again listened. After the chaos came stillness. No lights, no audience, no noise. For the first time in his life, Chris Rock wasn't chasing the next laugh, he was chasing silence. He began to live differently. Therapy, once a word he avoided, became a sanctuary. He spoke openly about the long battle to understand himself, the childhood trauma he had buried, the fears he had disguised as ambition, the loneliness he had carried even at the top. He said, "You don't fix yourself once. You keep learning to listen." It was not a confession of weakness. It was the beginning of strength. In 2020, after decades of jokes about other people's flaws, he turned the spotlight inward. He was diagnosed with a nonverbal learning disorder, a neurological condition that made social cues and emotions harder to read. He didn't hide it. He laughed about it, but this time the laughter was softer, kinder. "I used to think I was bad at people," he said. "Turns out I'm neurologically bad at people." The honesty made him more human than ever. Then came the pandemic, a world forced into the same isolation he had known all his life. He caught COVID, mild but humbling. "You think you're in control," he said, "and then something invisible reminds you you're not." He recovered, but he changed. Early mornings replaced late nights. Meditation replaced rehearsals. He started walking, just walking through quiet streets, rediscovering the sound of his own breath. His home in Alpine, New Jersey, once just an address, became a refuge. Sunlight through tall windows, shelves lined with photographs, his daughters, his mother, the friends he'd lost, the laughter he'd found again. He still owned his first home in Brooklyn, a small carriage house he refused to sell. "It reminds me where I started," he said. In its garage sat both a Rolls-Royce and an old bicycle, two versions of his life parked side by side, the boy who had nothing and the man who finally had enough. Fatherhood became the center of everything. Lola and Zara, his daughters now grown and carving their own paths. Lola studying in Paris, exploring art and culture. Zara at USC, following her mother's legacy in humanitarian work. They were his balance, his pride, his proof that love could survive the wreckage. "My daughters," he once said, "are the only standing ovations that still matter." He never remarried. He didn't need to. He found companionship in peace, in cooking, reading, calling old friends, just to listen instead of perform. Sometimes he slipped into small comedy clubs unannounced, taking the stage without cameras or contracts. Just him, a microphone, and a room full of strangers. No fame, no pressure, only truth. When it's good, he said it feels like breathing. By 2024, he was creating again, but on his own terms. He returned to television with Everybody Still Hates Chris, an animated revival of his childhood story. It wasn't nostalgia, it was renewal, a reminder that old pain can find new voices and that laughter, when born from truth, never dies. He began directing more, writing more, giving more, quietly donating to education programs, women's shelters, and disaster relief. No announcements, no cameras, just compassion. He once told a reporter, "If you've been lucky, your next job is to make someone else lucky too." At 60, the stage lights are softer now, the applause slower, but the laughter still rises, warm, grateful, timeless. He has nothing left to prove. The boy who learned to turn pain into laughter has become the man who finally understands silence. He no longer performs to survive. He performs to connect, to forgive, to remember, because the truest kind of success isn't standing in the spotlight. It's being at peace when the lights go out. Chris Rock's legacy isn't built on fame, it's built on honesty, the kind that makes people laugh first and think later. He didn't just tell jokes, he told truths too uncomfortable for the polite and too necessary for the world to ignore. Before him, comedy was often about escape. After him, it became a mirror. He gave voice to anger without hatred, to truth without cruelty. Every punchline carried weight, race, politics, family, pain, subjects most avoided. He dissected with surgical precision. He made laughter intelligent. He made intelligence entertaining. And he made millions of people see the world a little clearer. He belonged to no single generation. He was the bridge between Richard Pryor's fire and Dave Chappelle's philosophy, a craftsman who forged wit into empathy. His influence runs through stand-up television and even film, a ripple effect still moving through young comedians who grew up quoting him, studying his rhythm, like scripture. For them, Chris Rock wasn't just a performer. He was proof that truth could be profitable. His jokes on class, color, and identity reshaped how America talked about itself. He made late-night television confront what it preferred to laugh past. He could stand before a roaring crowd and say, "This is who we are," and somehow make the confession feel like redemption. In the archives of modern entertainment, his name sits beside the greats. But what separates him isn't the awards, it's the integrity. He never diluted his message for comfort. He never softened the truth for applause. And yet people followed him, not because he was perfect, but because he was human enough to admit he wasn't. Critics called him fearless. He called himself honest. "Fearless is easy," he once said. "Honest is hard." That honesty became his signature, raw, stripped, unpretentious. He turned everyday pain into collective healing. He turned the smallest humiliation into shared strength. And in doing so, he turned comedy into history. Even his silence became part of his art. After the Oscars, when the world demanded outrage, he gave restraint. That moment alone redefined masculinity for a generation, teaching millions that control is also power, that grace can roar louder than revenge. In a culture that thrives on chaos, he proved that dignity is still radical. Today, universities study his work, comedians reference his timing, filmmakers quote his rhythm, and audiences from Harlem to Tokyo still find themselves in his words. Because laughter in his hands was never about forgetting. It was about remembering who we are, where we came from, and what pain can become when we refuse to let it destroy us. Chris Rock's legacy is not written in stone, but in sound, the sound of a man who turned silence into music, anger into art, tragedy into truth. He once said, "Comedy is the proof that we survived." If that's true, then his story is proof that survival can be beautiful. When you look at Chris Rock's life, it feels less like a career and more like a confession stretched across 60 years. He never asked for sympathy, only understanding. He built his empire from pain and kept its foundations visible, as if to remind the world that truth, however fragile, can still hold weight. It's easy to celebrate his genius, the awards, the sold-out tours, the sharp humor that pierced hypocrisy like glass. But what makes him extraordinary isn't the laughter he created, it's the silence he learned to live with after it faded. Because when the crowd disappears, most performers crave the next applause. Chris Rock learned to crave peace instead. He is not without flaws. He has admitted them: the infidelity, the stubborn pride, the need to control everything until nothing felt natural anymore. Yet maybe that's what makes him real. His mistakes didn't erase his greatness. They completed it. They showed that brilliance can still be broken, and that brokenness can still teach brilliance how to breathe. There's something almost sacred about his evolution from a boy bullied into silence to a man who mastered the sound of truth. Every tragedy that sought to silence him became part of the rhythm he carried forward. He turned humiliation into wisdom, regret into responsibility, and pain into compassion. Few artists ever reach that level of honesty, and fewer still survive it. When we watch him now calm and grounded, we're not just seeing a comedian, we're seeing a survivor who finally understands that laughter is not escape, it's return. A return to the self stripped of performance, stripped of fear. He no longer needs to be the loudest voice in the room. He's learned that the softest one often carries the most truth. Perhaps that is the real legacy of Chris Rock. Not his fame, not his fortune, but his willingness to let the world see the cracks and still call it comedy. Because if pain can become laughter, and laughter can become healing, then maybe that's what art was always meant to do. And yet, even now, one question lingers in the air. After all the lights, the scandals, the redemption, who is Chris Rock when the curtain finally falls? Maybe we'll never know. Maybe that mystery is the point. Time moves differently for legends. It doesn't pass, it lingers. It waits in the quiet corners of memory, in the echo of laughter that still hums long after the voice has gone silent. For Chris Rock, the road from Brooklyn's cracked sidewalks to Hollywood's brightest stage has never been straight. It has been jagged, bruised, beautiful. Every detour a lesson, every scar a signature. He once said comedy is the proof that we survived. But maybe survival was never the goal. Maybe the real miracle was learning how to live. Now, in the twilight of 60, his laughter carries a different tone, softer, wiser, touched by grace. He no longer performs to fill the silence. He performs to honor it. The boy who learned to use humor as a shield became the man who uses it as a bridge between pain and peace, between who he was and who he finally became. Some nights he still slips into a small New York club unannounced. No cameras, no entourage, just him, a stool, a mic, and a quiet crowd waiting to hear the truth. He begins with a joke, nothing fancy, nothing rehearsed. Then he pauses, and for a moment that pause feels eternal, the kind of silence only someone who has lived through too much can command. It's in that pause where Chris Rock truly exists, not the fame, not the tragedy, just the man still standing, still searching, still speaking softly into the dark. He once asked, half joking, half confessing, "What's the secret to life?" Then he smiled and said, "Maybe it's just finding a way to laugh again." Perhaps that's all any of us are doing, learning to laugh again, even after the world falls silent. Because laughter fades, applause dies, but truth, the kind spoken from a scar, echoes forever. Somewhere beyond the lights and headlines, a man who made the world laugh sits quietly in a New Jersey kitchen, sipping coffee as the morning light touches his face. And in that stillness, he seems content, not victorious, just human. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now you know.